welcome to Frontline Bible Church. It's great to see most of you here today. All those except you wearing Michigan gear right now. Other than that, I know. For those who don't know, I'm a Penn State fan. So, your team did it yesterday. I know. You guys feel really bad. I can see it. Anyway, in spite of all that, it is good to see all of you here today. Definitely good to be a part of the worship time. Boy, it took me back. That song, I don't know, Dave, do you know when the last time we sang that song was? Did you see in the archives? Did you have to dust it off? Or? About 1980, I think, was about the last time we sang that song. That was like a throwback right there. But it's good to see everybody today. Glad you're here. And really quick, I heard a little birdie tell me that Max Carroll turned 60 tomorrow. So, Max, where are you at? Max, there we go. All right. You don't look a day over 59, man. So, it's good to be able to celebrate with you, Max. All right, so we wrapped up our series on prayer. And if you missed any of that, you can go back and watch it online. We record all of our services, so you can watch it online or on YouTube, frontlinebible.com, or Frontline Bible Church on YouTube. You can check that out. But we finished that up on prayer. And the reason for it is because we're doing what I call back to the basics. And so we've been looking at what I look at as over the year. I want to make sure that we as a church are doing the basics well. And there are a few things that are critical to us as believers. And one of those things is prayer. Another one is discipleship, actually growing in that. And then the other part of it is sharing our faith, actually getting it out. So it all is about our relationship with God, which is prayer and discipleship. But discipleship is also how we learn to love one another. So there's an upward and then there's an outward component, which is part of sharing the gospel. Gospel-driven evangelism. And so as a church, I thought, for 2023-24 ministry year, I want to make sure that we are making sure that we're doing the basics right. And so one of the things that we are going to be talking about is this week, we're going to be starting, it's actually a 3-week thing that we're going to be doing on stewardship. Now, what does stewardship have to do with prayer, discipleship, and sharing the gospel? What does it have to do with it? And so years ago, I guess it has been years ago, one of the things that we did was we went through a book, and it was called No Man Left Behind. And there was something in this book that came out, which I thought was very interesting. And it talked about how this is what a lot of churches do. So we'll get up here, you can see it's called methods. So methods, what do churches do? Well, we preach, we teach, we have mentoring, leadership training, Bible studies, and seminars, and small groups, and private study. And then the outcomes that we want to see. We want to see godly families. We want to see fellowship. We want to see outreach and evangelism. We want to see people engaging in service and doing missions. We want to see stewardship, people being better stewards of things. See worship, vocation, which is your workplace. How do you take God to work? And then social justice. And so we're like, okay, this is what we want to see, and this is how we're going to get it. Preaching, teaching, mentoring, all those sort of things. You can see it. Well, oftentimes, this is what it looks like in a typical church. So, let's say we want to see better stewardship. So, you know what we're going to do? We're going to preach about it. We're going to teach about it. We're going to maybe do some Bible studies about it. We're going to do some small group studies. That's what we're going to do because we recognize we want to see stewardship increase. Well, stewardship oftentimes is code for we need more money. That's what it's code for. So the reason why you bring a series out on stewardship is because you look at the budget. The board says to the pastor, hey, we need more money. So, pastor, would you be willing to preach something on stewardship just so we can get more money coming in? Now, it doesn't sound very spiritual, right? The hearts are usually there in the right place. But the question is, how do we go about this? So one of the things that this book talked about, which I thought was so cool, was this. What happens if we look at it like this? You see, Jesus says, what are the 2 greatest commandments? The 2 greatest commandments are love your Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and what? Love your neighbor as yourself. You could summarize being a disciple as one who loves God and one who loves others. That's the way you could summarize this. So if we as a church say we want to be about discipleship, then the purpose of what we're trying to do is teaching people how to love God and how to love others appropriately. That's what we're supposed to do. So when we look at over the course of the year and say, okay, let's talk about discipleship. Let's talk about this as when it comes to back to the basics. Well, what that looks like then is let's teach people how to love God and love others. And so we're going to preach about what does it look like to love God and love others. We're going to teach about it. We're going to mentor others. We're going to do leadership training. We'll do Bible studies, seminars, so on and so forth. Why? Because someone who loves God and loves others with all their heart, soul, mind, and strength, this is what it ends up doing. You end up with somebody who is in love with God, loves others. They will have a godly family. They will. If you love God and you love others, guess what? You're going to want to spend time with your Christian brothers and sisters. You're going to want to. You're going to want to share your faith with others. Why? Because you love God and you love others. If somebody says, hey, here's a service project, this is what you can do, you're going to want to do it. Why? Because you love God and you love others. Unfortunately, when we get it backwards, and this is what it looks like behavior modification. Right? It looks like behavior modification. And nobody likes to have their behavior modified, do they? I mean, nothing like coming to church and getting a good old dose of a guilt trip, right? So when I say let's do a stewardship series, I think it's very fitting that we start with a passage that started with love God and love others. So I want you to turn in your Bibles to Luke chapter 10, please. Luke chapter 10. Luke chapter 10. On one occasion, Luke chapter 10, verse 25. I'm sorry, I didn't even give that to you. Luke 10, verse 25. Maybe you've heard this parable before, the parable of the Good Samaritan. On one occasion, an expert in the law stood up to test Jesus. Teacher, he asked, what must I do to inherit eternal life? Well, what is written in the law? He replied. How do you read it? He answered, here's the two greatest commandments. He answered, love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength and with all your mind. And love your neighbor as yourself. So he summarized the law, okay? Well, you have answered correctly, Jesus replied. Do this and you will live. But he wanted to justify himself. So he asked Jesus, and who is my neighbor? In reply, Jesus gave a parable. So once again, he starts with saying, okay, what do I do to have to be acceptable to God? Well, if you boil it all down, what does the law say? Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. Love your neighbor as yourself. The bar is set so high that this person realizes, okay, there's no way that I can do this completely. So what does he do? He says, I want to justify myself. I want to justify myself. So if I can find the loophole, how many of you realize that Congress deals with a lot of loopholes, right? Yeah. The IRS tax code is full of loopholes, right? I mean, it's loopholes. We love the concept of the loophole. So this religious leader says to Jesus, well, who is my neighbor? Because to a Jew, if you were a Jew, your neighbor was a fellow Jew. Your neighbor was not a Gentile. Your neighbor was definitely not a Samaritan. Your neighbor was your brother or your sister who was a Jew. So he says, well, who is my neighbor? And so Jesus, rather than answering the question, simply gives a parable. And this is the parable. Let's read it. In reply, Jesus said, a man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho when he fell into the hands of robbers. They stripped him of his clothes, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead. A priest happened to be going down the same road, and when he saw the man, he passed by on the other side. So too, a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan, as he traveled, came where the man was, and when he saw him, he took pity on him. He went to him, bandaged his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. Then he put the man on his own donkey, took him to an inn, and took care of him. The next day he took out two silver coins and gave them to the innkeeper. Look after him, he said, and when I return I will reimburse you for any extra expense you may have. Which of these three do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of robbers? The expert in the law replied, well, the one who had mercy on him. Jesus told him, go and do likewise. You know, as I look at this, clearly this man was thinking, as long as I can engage a loophole, then I can still be justified myself. The point of the Sermon on the Mount, the point of so much of what Jesus did, was bringing somebody to a place in which they had to recognize, I can't do it myself. I need someone else. I need God to intervene, and that's exactly what Jesus did. That's exactly who Jesus was. He came in, he became flesh to take on our sin, to become our righteousness, to give us life to do this. But we have to come to the end of ourselves. But once we have this life that is found in Jesus Christ, we now have his life to live from, where we now can love the Lord our God with all of our heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love our neighbor as ourselves. The struggle is we really have a hard time doing this. Even though the life of Christ is within us, giving us the ability to do this, we still struggle to do it, and we still like our loopholes, is what we do. And so today, as we're going to talk about stewardship, I'm going to say stewardship begins with the letter A. Stewardship begins with your attitude. Stewardship begins with your attitude. Now, here's the cool part. When the board came to me and said, what do you think? Actually, it was the trustees. We said, what do you think about doing a stewardship series? And I said, you know what? I wanted to do it anyway. I wanted to do something on stewardship anyway. It was something that's been on my mind. It's not something we cover a lot here at Frontline. We did a little class earlier in a Bible class in the summer or late spring or something. I think it was late spring when I got back from the mission trip. But we don't really talk a lot about it, a lot of times because there's a struggle. How much do you talk about money? How much do you talk about money? Nobody likes to have money be talked about. But I thought, you know what? Let's do it. Let's talk about this. And wouldn't you know, this is so cool. Wouldn't you know, I get to do a series when we are in the black as a church. So I'm coming to you not because we're saying, let's talk about this because we need you to give because we're not making budget. In fact, it's the opposite. We are over budget. Isn't that amazing? Yeah, I thought that was pretty cool. So my encouragement is this is the time to talk about it because it's a spiritual issue. It's part of being a disciple is how do we view stewardship? And so we're going to look at a couple attitudes from this particular parable and maybe see how it relates to you and how it relates to me. So first of all, what is a steward? And you can maybe write this down if you want to. We're going to talk about this over the next 3 weeks. A steward is someone who takes care of something or someone for someone else. A steward is someone who takes care of something or someone for someone else. That's what a steward is. And then so by extension, because stewardship sounds like a church word, right? By extension, what is stewardship? Stewardship is the careful and responsible management of something or someone entrusted to one's care. So it's not just a churchy word. In fact, we realize this all the time. When I let my children borrow one of my vehicles, I'm asking them to steward that for me. They are responsible to manage that thing and themselves, actually, because it is my vehicle, and so I've entrusted the vehicle to them. They are a steward, evidencing stewardship of what I gave to them, of what I offered to them. So stewardship is not just a churchy word, but oftentimes it's relegated to that. In fact, it's oftentimes relegated to this idea of stewardship equals give more money, give money. And that's not the case. So as we look at stewardship, let's break it down a little bit. Here is some attitudes of stewardship. If you look in your passage, here's the first attitude. What's yours is mine, and I'm going to take it. So this is the first attitude. What's yours is mine, and I'm going to take it. So let's look at the parable. Verse 30. A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho when he fell into the hands of robbers. They stripped him of his clothes, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead. So here we get the first attitude. What's yours is mine, and I'm going to take it. Now, most of us would look at this and go, that's probably wrong. At least I would hope you would see that. You know, we live in a society today that while there's a lot of bad things that happen, thankfully still in our society, most people would view this as a crime. The person is walking down the road, says, you have something that I want, therefore I'm going to beat you and take it. Most of us would not engage in the beating part, but oftentimes we may look at somebody and say, I think you have more than you need, therefore I'm going to take it. Now, we usually don't go to how many porch thieves, porch bandits do we have here? Do we have any Amazon porch bandits? Anybody willing to? You know, this is a real thing out there. That's why they invented those Ring doorbells or whatever, so you could see who stole your packages. I love seeing some of the things that they do to get back at the porch bandits. I love that stuff when they blow up, and it's great. So you see the whole thing of what's yours is mine, and I'm going to take it. Now we would say that's bad, but how often do we engage in this, even at work? How many of us think to ourselves, my work does not pay me enough to work as hard as what I do? Thank you. At least somebody's honest. So, Amy, there we go. Amy, maybe you can do the employee sit down or whatever it is. Amy's a preschool teacher, by the way. Right, exactly. We can engage in this when we look at our workplace and we say, you know what, you don't pay me enough money to work this hard. Therefore, what's yours is mine, and I'm going to take it. You don't pay me enough, so I'm going to waste my time. Or, you know what, I'm going to take things from the company. You know what, they don't need this tool. They don't need this service. They don't need one of those things. I'm going to engage in this. I'm going to take. Why? Because we have an attitude that they have more than they need, or they're not good stewards of it themselves. Therefore, it's my responsibility to help them be a better steward so I can have it for myself. The way I would interpret this is oftentimes this is a you owe me mentality. You owe me mentality. This is very, very, very prevalent in our world today. We seem to have a growing separation in our culture between what we would say the haves and the have-nots. And they tend to like being divided over this sort of stuff. And so the have-nots look and say, well, you're the have, therefore you should give it to me. But that attitude does not actually play out biblically when we realize that everything in this world is God's, and I am simply responsible to manage that which God has given to me. That's what it is. It comes down to that. Whether that person has more or has less doesn't change the fact that I'm responsible to manage that which God has given to me. So, like I said, we look in the parable, we go, yeah, that's bad. They stripped him, beat him, took his money. But we can fall into the same sort of an attitude of what's yours is mine, and I'm going to take it. So let's look at another attitude of stewardship. What's mine is mine, and I'm going to keep it. What's mine is mine, and I'm going to keep it. And this gets played out in verse 31. A priest happened to be going down the same road, and when he saw the man, he passed by on the other side. So too a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. Now, do you think Jesus meant to use the words priest and Levite? Yeah, I think he did. Because we see there in verse 25, on one occasion, an expert in the law. Okay? Now, we think of a lawyer. That's what we think of, an expert in the law. But back in the day, the Sadducees were they were the experts in the law. They were the lawyers, but the law they were talking about was the Mosaic law, the Judaic law. Okay? That's what they were going through, okay? So they were the experts in the law. So Jesus picks two religious people, a priest and a Levite, and he throws it in the face and he says, this is why, or these people saw the need and they walked by anyway. Now, why would a priest or a Levite walk on the other side of the road? Because they didn't want to be unclean. They had a mission that they needed to do, whether they were coming from the mission or going to the mission, whichever one. They were going from Jericho to Jerusalem. Now, why would a priest go from Jericho to Jerusalem? Because of their service, their duty. That's what they had to do. So they were on their way to go and serve their duty. And so they had to be ceremonially clean. They needed to be this way in order to be able to fulfill their duty. For a priest, they would have to go up about once a year, and they would have their time, and then they would go and serve in Jerusalem. They would go to the temple, they would do their duty, and then they would go back home, and then be 11 months of the year back at home. This was the process that they would do. So you can see the man, he says, I looked and I saw the person who had been beaten and half dead. I had a job I needed to do, therefore I had to keep going. I didn't have time to stop. How many of you have passed somebody on the road thinking to yourself, I don't have time to stop? If I stop, I will be late for work. And if I'm late for work again, probably because you've been late before, but if I'm late for work again, my boss is going to yell at me, whatever the situation is, I don't have time. I heard a funny story. This happened a few years ago. It was at a Christian college. And they asked some speakers to come and speak on the parable of the Good Samaritan. And what they did was some of the people planted somebody along the side of the road just off the campus. They planted somebody on the side of the road just off the campus that was broken down. And the question was, would the speaker who was going to preach about the Good Samaritan, would the speaker stop to help the person? Now, nobody did. Why? Because he had a job to do. I mean, this guy was there to speak. He was there to speak about the Good Samaritan. He wasn't there to help the poor person along the side of the road. Now, how many of you would have stopped to help the guy on the side of the road if you had a job to do to go and speak at the chapel about helping people along the side of the road? Garrett was the only one. Okay, maybe Eric. Okay, all right. I probably wouldn't have either. Why? Because my brain would have been focused on something else. Rather than saying, okay, I have to stop, I have to do this, I'd be thinking differently about that. So before we start casting judgment on the priest and the Levite, even though Jesus did, before we do that, a lot of times we can see, hey, I fall into the same category a lot because what is mine, and I got to keep it. I'm just being a good steward of the things that God has given me by keeping this. Unfortunately, it got him into trouble. I had a neighbor, this was back a number of years ago. My neighbor, his name was Ken, and he told me that he almost got in trouble by the cops. And the reason why he said he almost got in trouble by the cops was because he was driving down 36th Street. We used to live at 36th in Hazelwood, right there in Wyoming. He was driving down the street, and he saw an old man fall on the sidewalk, and he tripped, and he fell down on the sidewalk. And so Ken immediately stops his car on 36th Street, gets out to help the man. Well, the police pull up behind the car with the lights on and want to give Ken a ticket because Ken's car was in the middle of 36th Street. Now, if you realize 36th Street is a busy street, but the cop looked at that and said, okay, you know what? I get it. You were trying to help the man, but you can't park your car in the middle of 36th Street. Well, Ken looks at the cop and he says, what if it were your dad? The cop said, thank you, and drove away. I thought, that's really good. You know, what if it were your dad? What he realized is what is mine, and I'm going to keep it, oftentimes is an attitude that can begin to permeate. There is I read an illustration about ice cube Christians. Ice cube Christians. Now, what would you think about ice cubes and Christians having to go together? A lot of Christians are kind of like ice cube takers. Anybody here not know what an ice cube tray is? Anybody here? Now, with modern refrigerators and those sort of things, you know, the refrigerator makes the ice for you, correct? So as soon as you take ice out, it just remakes it. Anybody here ever filled an ice cube tray before? Okay. So what is the rule about the ice cube tray? You refill it, right? I mean, that's the thing. That's the thing about ice cube trays is you take the thing and you maybe take one or two out and and then you use the ice cube, but the idea behind it is you refill it when you're done. Be honest here. How many of you struggle to refill the ice cube trays? All right. I appreciate the honesty. See, in our house, when we had ice cube trays, in our house it was, if there was still one left, you didn't have to refill it, right? So you'd use the ice cubes, but as long as there was one left, hey, I didn't take the last one. It's not up to me to refill the thing. So you know what? I took maybe all 11 of the 12, but I still did not take the last one, so I just put it back in there. You know what it's like to walk into the maybe you don't, because like I said, modern ice cube. But you probably know what it's like to go and you're like, oh man, I just need some ice to fill, maybe just this cold glass of water, and then you go and you pull it up, nothing in there. There's no ice cubes. Now you can't just go and say, refill it, stick it in, presto, you got ice cubes, right? It takes time. So you appreciate the ones who look at that and say, I'm going to refill the ice cube trays for the next person. I'm going to be a blessing. And when people keep doing that, everybody wins, right? I use some ice cubes, I refill it, and I pass it on for the next person. I have a responsibility to take what I've been given and to bless somebody else. It's not just what's mine is mine and I get to keep it. What's mine is eventually going to be yours and I'm going to give it to you. That's the other attitude. But we can stop when we say, no, what you have has been done for me. And it stops with me. And that's what the religious leaders of Jesus' day really thought. They thought that stewardship meant I have a job to do, what's mine is mine, and I'm going to keep it well. But Jesus had to remind them, no, there's a greater attitude at play when it comes to an attitude of stewardship, which is this. What's mine is yours, and I'm going to give it. What's mine is yours, and I'm going to give it. Remember, he started with, even the religious leaders said, to love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and to love your neighbor as yourself. To love your neighbor as yourself. So it's loving is really about giving. And so if I recognize myself as a steward, when it comes to stewardship, there is an attitude that needs to be at place, which is a recognition that what God has given to me has not just been given to me to keep. What God has given to me is He has given it to me to be a blessing, to give it. And it's not just money. It's not just money. It's time. It's talents. It's even something like a smile. Something as simple as that. It's a handshake. It's something. It's when I realize that I have been given something and I have a responsibility, but I hate to say that. Let's say this. I have an opportunity. I have an opportunity to take that which God has given to me and He's blessed me with in order to be able to give it to somebody else. And so in the parable, He tells the parable regarding the Samaritan. But a Samaritan, as he traveled, came where the man was, and when he saw him, he took pity on him. He went to him and bandaged his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. Now, why oil and wine? A disinfectant, the alcohol, okay, which tells you this man drank wine. Jesus is condoning wine here, right? Just kidding, that's another story. Anyway. So we see this, though. We see Jesus taking the oil and taking the wine. I see the man taking the oil, taking the wine, and he pours it on his wounds. And then he put the man on his own donkey, took him to an inn, and took care of him. You know the rest of the story. He took out the 2 silver coins, gave it to the innkeeper. Look after him, he says, and when I return, I will reimburse you for any extra expense you may have. What's interesting about the Good Samaritan is that there were similarities between the Good Samaritan and the others. And the first one was this. They all had the same problem. They all were on a mission. They all were going someplace. They all saw the same problem. They saw the man on the side of the road, but they were all going. It wasn't like this guy was the trail monitor. You know, and so, well, the trail monitor shows up and he takes care of him. We should be like the trail monitor. In the story, we have this man, he's on the same mission, but he stops. And because they all had something else to do. And so here's the thing. The Good Samaritan's attitude helped him to do this. Oops, wrong one. The Good Samaritan attitude, this. It helped him ignore any inconveniences. It helped him overcome any excuses, and it helped him to share his possessions because it started with an attitude. Now, granted, I realize we're making much of this Samaritan story because do we really find the word attitude in here? We really don't. But there's something about the way in which he acted which clearly shows there was an attitude about him, and especially in terms of recognizing the stewardship there. What is mine is yours, and I get to give it. That's what it is. So what were the inconveniences? I'm sure this man had a mission. He ends up stopping. He has to go. He takes his own donkey, puts him on it, sends him over there. The excuses, I mean, if you're a Samaritan, why in the world would you want to care for a Jew? The Jews hated your guts. That's like seeing a Democrat lying on the side of the road. You're a Republican. Or maybe vice versa. There's a Republican sign laying on the side of the road, and you're a Democrat. You tend to hate each other. So what would you do? One's got the Trump hat on. Would you stop and help? Some of you, yeah, that's why I would. Others of you, I wouldn't help that guy. You know? What are the signs that oftentimes that people give off that makes you say, you know what, I'm going to help you versus I'm not going to help you? Are there people that fit in the classification for you that says, no, you're not worthy? I remember I was probably 15 years ago. I was driving north on 131. And it was almost to 44th Street. Flat tire. I pull off to the side of the road. It's nighttime. Pull off to the side of the road. And 3 people stopped to see if I needed help. I was shocked. Now, I'm a dude, okay? I'm a guy. I didn't give off the vibe that I needed any help. You know, it's not like I'm sitting there just looking around like anybody. I mean, I'm in the back with getting my spare tire out, getting the jack. 3 people. Hey, you need any help? You need any help? Nope, I got it. One guy pulls over on the side of the road. He's got a truck. He hauls a jack, a floor jack, out of the back of his truck. I'm like, who drives around with a floor jack? One guy, maybe it's you. Who drives around with a floor jack? This guy comes out, jacks my car up, so much better than that little thing that, you know what I'm talking about? Useless. You know, so much better than that thing, and it jacks my car up. I changed my tire. It was like I had my confidence in humanity restored that day. Overcome any excuses, share his possessions. Man, there's just something beautiful about that. But it starts with an attitude, which is, what's mine is yours and I'm going to give it. It's not just mine to keep. It's not just mine to hoard, or it's not just mine to steal from you. It's what's realization is, from a stewardship perspective, I've been given so many things, and I get to turn around and be a blessing with it. But that's the way it starts with the attitude. And so I'll ask you, kind of, what's been your attitude? Observations about attitudes. The attitude of what's mine is yours and I'm going to give it it's more important than abilities. Do you think that this man on the side of the road, when the Samaritan said, hey, can you show me your credentials to care for me? Are you a doctor by any chance? No, sorry, I'm just a businessman. Well, I'm sorry, I'm going to wait for the next guy then. This man clearly needed something. And even though the Samaritan, we're not told that he had any abilities, clearly the Samaritan was capable to be able to at least offer something. Man, one of the things that I struggle with sometimes as a pastor is the feeling like I need to know what to say to somebody when they're going through something hard. Because as a pastor, I want to feel like I want to say the right things. I don't want to say the wrong thing to somebody and maybe upset them or whatever, even though I've been known to do that a time or two in my life. I don't want to do that, and so sometimes I'll be like, no, I can't go to the person because I'm not even sure what I'm going to say. Instead of saying it really doesn't matter. Just go, just do something. Even if you say something dumb, admit, hey, I may say something dumb, but I want to help. I want to just do anything that I can. It's not about our abilities. It's realizing, okay, if maybe God has put me into a position, what can I do to serve? How can I help? What can I anything I can offer here. If you go with a humble heart, what's mine is yours, and I'm going to give it. I want to help in any way that I can. It's more important than position. Like I said, this guy on the trail, this Samaritan, he wasn't the trail monitor. He didn't have a position that says, I have to do this. He was just somebody who was walking down the trail. And I think the parallel is easy for us in our own life. I don't need a position to help. Yes, as the pastor, I get to offer a lot of care. But the most beautiful thing for me is when I look as our church and I see how you guys, when the body cares for the body. That's a beautiful thing. And I gotta commend Frontline Bible Church. I have to. The way you guys care for everybody else is pretty remarkable. And if you're maybe not being cared for the way you think you need it to be, please let us know. Maybe it's just our church doesn't know how to care, doesn't even know what you need. We love to care. That's what we do. But let me tell you something. You're just as much a part of the body as we are. And so maybe you need to recognize you have a part to play in this body too of how you can care for somebody else. It's not a matter of whether you have a position here or a position at work or whatever else. Just the ability to care. When my old neighbor Ken stopped to help that man, he didn't have a position, he just did it. Don't worry about the position, whether you have something to do or not. Just offer to help. If you have something you can do to help, just do it. And then the last observation, it's more important than timing. When's the good time to help somebody? Anytime. Anytime. One of the things for me, and maybe this is something for you, I used to struggle to say, Lord, how do you communicate to me? What are the things, how do I hear your voice? I want to know, I want to care, I want to respond when you do something. And so one of the things that I have done is I've gotten to a place now where when God brings somebody to mind, I do something with it. So like I'll send a text or I'll pray for them, or maybe I'll call them, and I'll even say sometimes, hey, I don't even know why I'm calling you right now, but I just felt led that I needed to call you. I needed to do something. And I've begun to realize that that's like the little whispers of God. When he just brings a person to mind. I'm not the mystical person that says God is talking to me all the time like the little person. But I do believe God communicates with his people. And when God brings a person, especially when it's like, you know, the person you haven't thought of in years and all of a sudden their name pops in your brain? That's a great indication to maybe do something about it. Don't wait until maybe there's a better time. Maybe at that moment just say, hey, all of a sudden I just started thinking of you. I don't know why. What's going on? How are you doing? Is there anything I can pray for you about, help you with? You'd be amazed the responses you get back. So many times from people that I have yet to have somebody, which maybe now that you heard this, if I do this to you, don't just play back to me, okay? But I've yet to have somebody say, that was so random, don't ever text me again. Why did you just do this out of the blue? I'm so done with you, whatever. I've yet to have that happen. Usually it's, wow, I was not prepared for that. And you know what? I'm going through something right now, actually. Can you please pray? That's so crazy how God worked. That's the cool sort of a thing. If you recognize that your time is not just yours, it's yours to give. Your resources, not just yours to enjoy, it's yours to give. Your talents, whatever else, it's yours, but it's yours to give. And the more you give, the more blessed you get. We're going to talk about this in future weeks, but I wanted to make sure we started today with this idea that really stewardship is about your attitude. It starts right there. I want to show you one other thing here. And it's this principle of God owns and we manage. I'm just going to read a couple verses for you. I have them on my sheet for time's sake. The earth is the Lord's and everything in it. The world and all who live in it. That's Psalm 24:1. The earth is the Lord's and everything in it, the world and all who live in it. 1 Chronicles 29:11. Yours, O Lord, is the greatness and the power and the glory and the majesty and the splendor. For everything in heaven and earth is yours. Well, say it, last one. Acts 17. This is when Paul was speaking there in Athens at the Areopagus. And he says these words. He says, "The God who made the world and everything in it is the Lord of heaven and earth and does not live in temples built by hands. And he is not served by human hands as if he needed anything. Because," here it is, "he himself gives all men life and breath and everything else." Do you get the theme here? Everything is God's. So what does that mean? That means God owns everything. If you're given $500, how much of that does God own? Very true. Garrett, that's wrong. Yeah. If you're given something, everything ultimately comes from God. God owns everything. We are simply the managers. So let's come back to the principle again. God owns and we manage. And so what's mine has been given to me from God, and it is mine that God has given to me to use to be able to bless others. And the cool part of the whole thing is this: I get to enjoy it as well. And we're going to talk about that in the coming weeks, of just how much fun it is to see how much fun it is to take the ways in which you've been blessed and to bless other people. I'm telling you, if you have never experienced that, you are missing out. Jesus said it is more blessed to give than to receive. And that's so much fun, but you got to trust God with it, and that's the thing. And so it's not a matter of guilting or anything, it's just a matter of stewardship. And so with that, we're going to wrap up. There's more things I could cover, but we're going to move on. Fact is this: stewardship begins with your attitude. It begins with your attitude. I'll remind you about the three choices there. What's yours is mine, and I'm going to take it. Hopefully that's not where you're at. What's mine is mine, and I'm going to keep it. That's a lot of the way in which we live, but hopefully it comes down to what's mine is yours, and I'm going to give it. And so here's your homework, your challenge. Sorry, Cliff. Here's your challenge. Who needs help? Who needs help? Maybe it's somebody right here today. Maybe it's somebody right here. Who needs help? Maybe it's somebody who needs their leaves raked. You know, this is a perfect time of year to rake some leaves. How many here in this church need their leaves raked? Yeah. This is a perfect time of year. If you genuinely need your leaves raked, I'll bet you, why don't you come and talk to me afterwards, and I guarantee we'll find some people to go rake your leaves. And I'll bet you they're going to get more of a blessing than you will. I may be going to go even rake your leaves. If you need help with something, let us know. I would love to help. I would love to see our body come alongside. Maybe it's a neighbor that you've been trying to reach. People don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. Maybe it's somebody that you can just reach out to, somebody that needs a meal, somebody that needs something. Who needs help? What's yours, what's mine is yours, and I'm going to give it. I hope that's your attitude. And eliminate excuses. I'm too busy. I got this too much going on, whatever else. Trust me, if you say, if God's put it on your heart, He will give you the time and the space to do it. He will. He always does. And then do something this week. Don't say, well, I'll wait till the end of the series. I want to see what the rest of the series is all about. Now, just do something this week and watch what happens when you put your faith into practice and say, God, as your disciple, I love you and I love others. Lord, show me who to serve, make it clear, and I'm going to do something about it. So with that, let's wrap up today. God, I want to thank you for today. I thank you for your word. I thank you for these attitudes that we can talk about today. I know it's difficult for me, even in my own life. I struggle with this. I get super busy. I feel overwhelmed at things, and I feel like I don't have time to give it away. What's mine is mine, and I got to keep it. I got to keep all the time that I have. I don't have much money. I got to keep all the money. And yet, God, you are such a generous God. You're generous with your time. You're generous with your resources. God, if I believe you own everything, and I'm simply here to manage, then I need to manage according to your heart, not my own. And so, God, I pray that I will have a better attitude this week as I learn to trust you more and to simply be a conduit. And if you bless me richly, then may I bless others richly. If you bless me not very much, may I still bless others with what you've given me, no matter what. So God, I thank you for your word. I thank you for this. May we be a church of good stewardship, not because we have to, but because we simply love you and love others. So may we be a blessing this week. In Jesus' name we pray. And all those in agreement said, amen.